In this video, I want to talk about addiction. Now, I'm not a psychologist, I'm an anthropologist, okay? I'm a social scientist. Well, psychologists are also considered to the social sciences in some countries, but I'm not into psychology, I'm into anthropology. I look at the group behavior. I look at how groups think. I look at the context, the culture. And what I've noticed about addiction is that it's always enabled by society one way or the other. There is no such thing as an addiction that's not validated by society. To validate an addiction doesn't mean that people agree with the addiction, but it means that they enable it and they tolerate it because they don't want the alternative. Just think about this for a moment. Let's say you have a man who often watches football matches on TV. And he does it so often that he doesn't spend much time with his wife and his children. Let's say now that the wife complains about this, and even the children mention that dad is watching football games so often. Let's say now that the people in the community then begin to talk to this man, begin to address him all the time about his behavior. Sooner or later, this man needs to acknowledge that he has some emotional or mental conflict that needs to be addressed. And once that's addressed, he will be forced by the community to seek help so that his family will remain healthy. Because if the community tolerates the unhealthy family, they'll be also tolerating harm on the children. And when the children are older, it's community that will reap what they've sown. So a community that's alert and a community that's dedicated to remain healthy will never, under any circumstance, tolerate addiction. They will not. They will deal with the root of the matter swiftly. So, addiction can never occur in a vacuum. Nobody just becomes an addict just like that. Nobody wakes up in the morning one day with a clear blue sky saying, man, I'm going to become an addict, that I can't live without that pill anymore or without smoking. Nobody does that. It doesn't happen like that. Most addiction grows into the addict. So they're not even aware that they are becoming an addict. It's something that grows over time. And it begins with this. There is something challenging that the individual either doesn't want to face or they cannot face it. Because sometimes things are just overwhelming for you as an individual. Let's be clear here. We're all humans here. And because most of the people that are watching my channel are adults or at least in their teens, we can be honest and direct about these things. There are things that are just too overwhelming for you at the time. Okay? So a quick way to cope with something that's overwhelming is by having instant relief. And that instant relief can come from taking a pill or smoking a cigarette or watching a porn movie or just fighting. Because that also happens when people start fights with their spouse or with the children. Because the children can't really fight back. So that's why it's easy for them to dump their frustration on the children or their wife. Or on their husband if they're a woman. Or it can be that you dive deep into religion, whatever it is. Whatever the challenging thing is that's too overwhelming for you at the time, you get instant relief and you're okay. And from time to time, it's good to have relaxation. So that you want and crave relaxation, there's nothing wrong with that. But the moment the relaxation you're craving for becomes a substitute for living, then you call it an addiction. For example, there's nothing wrong with you wanting to play a video game after coming from work, if it relaxes you. There's nothing wrong with you taking a beer once in a while with friends, or taking some cup of wine when you go to a restaurant, or when you're at a party or a wedding. But the moment that substance, whether it's wine, whether it's tobacco, or maybe it's not a physical substance, but the moment that activity That activity can be sports, or it can be something negative as complaining or murmuring. The moment that substance or that activity becomes the substitute for living, with living I mean dealing with difficulties in a constructive manner, the moment that happens, you are an addict. You have an addiction. And in the beginning, you will not realize it because you are blinded by the instant relief that activity or substance gives you. It's only after other parts of your affairs, that can be your finances or your social relationships, begin to suffer, or those areas of your existence suffer damage due to the addiction, that you realize that something is up. But often when this happens, the addict is so at ease with the addiction, even though the addiction is it's actually a self-destructive loop. Even though the addict sees that addiction is self-destructive, even though the addict knows that things need to change because things have gone out of hand, often the addict is not willing to face what's beneath the addiction. See it like this. The addiction is a manifestation of something that's beneath the surface. When you see a tree, that tree is a consequence of a seed. And the roots that grew out of that seed are under the ground. Okay? So the trunk of the tree, as well as the branches and the leaves and the fruits on the tree, are all the result of the roots. Because the roots take up water from the soil. See addiction like that. It takes away the life out of you. But it has roots. It's not just there. The roots are mental and emotional. And what does spiritual has to do with it? There is a spiritual cause also for addiction. And that is when people rely on themselves. Self-reliant people, over time, will accumulate addictions, whether they're aware of it or not, because they are exhausting themselves, because they are self-reliant. That's why a lot of worldly people join cults, so that they won't have to rely on themselves for everything. We are not designed to operate in self-reliance. So the spiritual root of addiction is self-reliance. You want to have a grip on life. You want to have a grip on yourself and other people around you. And when this does not work, there is stress, and now you want to get rid of the stress. So the spiritual root is self-reliance. But apart from self-reliance, the emotional, mental roots have to do with avoidance. It can be, for example, that someone grew up with a father that was emotionally absent. And this caused confusion with the child. Now the child turned into an adult, and as an adult, he now has difficulty relating to other people. Now the adult now may be married even, but he or she still faces difficulty in relating emotionally to others. Because he or she was emotionally frustrated as a child way too often. Now, there is healing possible, but then they need to face the fact that they had a defective father or defective mother or whatever individual was defective in their upbringing. Then they need to face how that affected them over the years. They need to face they've become codependent. So it's a lot to go through. It's a lot to process. So often there are distractions that will numb the pain and numb the anxiety, and people can just continue. So an addiction serves a purpose. If an addiction didn't serve a short term, I'm saying this, if addiction did not serve a purpose, in the sense that if addiction did not bring short-term benefits, no addict would exist. Addiction exists because the addiction provides short-term relief. It has a benefit that expires. And it's this benefit that the addict is holding on to. The moment the addict forfeits this short-term benefit, he or she is not an addict anymore. Because the only thing that's left for them is to face the roots. Now, addiction, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't have to be a substance. It can also be an activity. Because the modus operandi of fallen mankind is to flee from things. They flee. Now, there are situations where it's legitimate to flee, okay? If you're in a store or in Walmart, wherever, and someone begins to scream and he has a gun, then you know that people are going to get hurt and people may even die because this lunatic is losing it. Then it's legitimate to flee. Or if you are in the metro or in the train, for example, and someone keeps looking at you, you don't know this individual is a stranger, he keeps looking at you, and you can see that the individual is stressed out and angry, then you know that this situation may escalate. So you may decide, I'm going to sit somewhere else. So there are times it's legitimate and even required of you to leave a situation. Or when you have a marriage partner and the marriage partner becomes physically violent and he or she refuses to seek help, then it's okay for you to walk away from that marriage. Okay, there are times it's legitimate for you to walk away, and sometimes you even should walk away when people don't want to comply with safety, okay? But fleeing should not be the standard thing you do. Fleeing should not be all that you think about. All addiction is a result of fleeing. Okay? You have legitimate fleeing, that's when you remove yourself from an objective dangerous situation. And then you have illegitimate fleeing, which is when people just don't want to face things, just want to be left alone. That's relief seeking. So addiction is a manifestation of relief seeking. Now, does that mean that all addicts are narcissists? No, absolutely not. Even though some are, but addiction is a narcissistic attitude. And this is something you need to understand about addiction. As I mentioned before, there's no such thing as an addiction that's not enabled by society. Because if society wanted addiction to stop, they would have addressed the defects of the community. And this is something that's been proven by some studies. But even without scholarly or scientific studies, it should be obvious. If you take a drug addict that used to be addicted to cocaine or to smoke or whatever, and you put them in a social context where they are looked after, where they are cared for, where their social significance is guarded by the community, that social connection kills their desire to take the substance. It's social dysfunction. That's the main reason people end up in addiction. Because think about it, I mean, you are a spirit being with a soul inhabiting a body, but you're also a social creature. You crave connections with other human beings. And the moment this craving for a connection is not met, you will need some substance or some activity to cope with the fact that you don't have healthy social connections. So when people are placed in a healthy social environment, addiction 90% of the time disappears. Unless you're dealing with a pathological individual that flees solutions. In general, you fix or you restore the social relationships of a community, addictions disappear. But social relationships are not a one-man project. It requires dedication, humility, vulnerability, and accountability. So people have to acknowledge that they have obligations towards one another and they're responsible for one another. Of course, every individual human being has a responsibility towards themselves, but we can't survive on our own. We need each other because we're social creatures. That's why we have obligations and responsibilities towards other people. So, to get rid of addiction, by the way, there is a spiritual root that needs to be addressed, okay? But even unbelievers can hinder and even evict most addictions in their community by just fixing the quality of the community. But that requires that people admit that they've been wrong and they need to change. The addict needs to be willing to receive help also, but even if the addict is willing to receive help, the community needs to change. And that's the issue often, is that worldly people don't want to change. So because they don't want to change, they don't want to face the defects and dysfunction that their stagnation causes. So when addiction manifests in some members of a community, it is a sign that that community is unhealthy. It is a sign that the community is dysfunctional. But who keeps the community going? The individual members. So the individual members together need to face the issue. It's not just the addict, whether it's a drug addict or a porn addict, whatever addict it is. You also have addiction to people. That's how borderliners are. It doesn't matter. It's not only the addict needs to face reality. The community also needs to face reality. Because that individual comes from a community. That individual did not fall from the sky. And they didn't become a drug addict in a vacuum. It happened in a social setting. So the social setting needs to be addressed also. And here comes the big issue. If you address the defects of a community, often commoners tend to attack you because they don't want to face themselves. They will blame the addict for everything, and to some extent the addict can be blamed in some situations, but there are times that the addiction is just a result of trauma and victimization by the same community. So if that community victimized someone, whether through neglect or through active oppression, and that individual ended up as a drug addict or as any type of addict, or they ended up with mental issues, then who's responsible for that condition? The community is, because the community enabled or actively inflicted harm on that individual. Now, the individual that's harmed needs to face the reality that they need help, but the community needs to face their iniquity and they need to seek deliverance, collectively as well as individually. No addiction can flourish nor exist in a healthy social climate. Let me repeat that. No addiction can exist nor persist in a healthy social climate. You need to have a toxic climate for addiction to exist and for addiction to continue. So every addict has at least 2 or more enablers that enable the addiction. Without enablers, no addiction can exist. That's why often when addicts want help, because they really need help, because they realize they can't do it on their own. But that's a big step. They realize that you need help, you can't do it on your own. Often addicts seek help, often they figure out sooner or later that it's the same people around them that were complaining about their addiction. Those same people that keep telling them you need to seek help. Often it's the same people that pressure them into seeking help. Often it's those same people that will resist the recovery. Why? Because those people are addicts themselves also. Let's say you have a cocaine addict and she wants to get rid of that addiction. She is determined. But she has a boyfriend, or she even has an auntie or some people close to her that are psychic addicts in a sense that they feel good about themselves at her expense. Her drug addiction, which was caused by childhood trauma, let me say this. She has an addiction caused by childhood trauma. And those other people, they feel good about themselves because they didn't end up like her. So now they are emotional vampires or energy vampires that are feeding off her addiction. So they're addicts too. Not addicted to cocaine, not addicted to any substance, but they're addicted to feeling good about themselves by comparing themselves with someone that's worse off. So those people around this female drug addict, they have a vested interest in her addiction. Even though, let me say consciously, they will agree that she needs help, and cautiously, they should admit that they should be happy for her, seeking help, that she's been getting free from the addiction. Secretly, they want her to remain an addict so they can remain with a good feeling about themselves. The moment the drug addict recovers, they are now in trouble because they don't have to face their own addiction, which is a far worse addiction than the cocaine addict had. Okay? So often, it's the enablers that will fight the recovery of the addict, not the addict himself or herself. That's why there are people that used to be addicted through addicted to physical substances. Some are even addicted to medicine. Because remember, a physical addiction will always bring side effects for your health. There is no such thing as a good addiction. Even if addiction is a psych addiction, so it's not related to physical substances, a psych addiction will have a similar effect on your body as a physical addiction. So there is no such thing as a good addiction. It does not exist. The short-term benefits do not weigh up to the long-term cost and the long-term harm. There are people that used to be addicts and they divorced their wives or divorced their husbands, or they got away from their children. They got away of their best friends. They got rid of certain people, and after they got rid of certain people, they recovered quickly. Because listen to what I'm saying here. The number one addiction people have is the addiction to be validated by other people. Now, some don't have this addiction directly, but they have other types of addictions. The number one addiction that people have is a psychic addiction. That's addiction that they want to be validated. People call it disrespect. They want to be respected. Well, the addiction to validation is promoted by society. It's conditioned into children also. But because this addiction contributes to people being stuck in the system, people don't look down on this. If someone is working way too much, which is at the expense of their health, often they're not called a workaholic either. Especially if their activity is, let me say, it validates the work ethic of society. So most addictions are not acknowledged as addictions, as defects, because if they're acknowledged as defects, then people need to answer to themselves and to others why the society or the best community enabled the defect. And then if they have to admit that, then they need to admit more things. And that will turn out ugly, so people don't want to go there. So an addiction is only outlawed by a community if the effects are too obvious. Alcoholism, cocaine addiction, heroin addiction, or smoking addiction, those addictions have instant harmful consequences, often in the form of drunk driving or in the form of affecting one's lungs. So because those addictions often have, not always, but often have instant negative effects that are too obvious, the community takes action against them. But addictions that are more hidden, where the short-term benefits can be exploited by society, those addictions are labeled with a different name. Now they don't call it a work addiction. They don't call you a workaholic. They call you someone with high work ethics or with good work ethics. This whole thing of hard work is an addiction in itself. Okay, just understand. An addiction cannot exist in a healthy social climate. So you need to have a toxic social climate for addiction to remain in existence. Example, if you have codependent people that keep seeking relief from others, that means they're addicted to people. Now, such an individual will not go to someone that's mentally stable to complain about their boyfriend, girlfriend, or the people they're addicted to. They won't, because the mentally sound individual will tell them, listen, you've been complaining about your boyfriend or girlfriend or this other individual so long, what are you doing about it? If that individual is so tiring, why are you still with him? And this will force the codependents to face themselves. And because the codependent doesn't want to face themselves, they will avoid such an individual. So, addiction cannot exist in a healthy social climate. You need to remember this. And there are many addictions that society covers up because they don't want alternative. Alternative is that they need to face things. And to face things means that there will be a fight. Because as I mentioned before, the number one addiction humans suffer from is addiction to be validated. Now, if you have drug addicts, or addicts in general, that are falling apart or self-destructing, and there needs to be a solution, that means that community has to change. It's individually, people need to change their attitude also. But often the rest of the community feels good about themselves because at least they're not like the drug addict, at least they're not like the alcoholic. They are validated at the expense of someone in a worse condition. So they have their own addiction they don't want to face. So if they are forced to face that addiction, some may turn violent and things may get out of hand. So often, a community does not want the alternative. So they prefer to enable addiction. Sometimes they will even promote addiction just so they won't have to deal with the truth. And that's why the world hates Christ. Because when Christ comes with his power and miracles happen, those miracles will always expose and uproot the dysfunction that they are enabling. So true miracles will uproot the stronghold that kept the dysfunction. Counterfeit miracles or counterfeit paranormal will only remove the symptom. But a real miracle that comes from the Holy Spirit will expose the root and uproot the roots of it. So that's why the world doesn't want the power of Christ. That's why the world doesn't want believers to walk by faith. The world has no problem with charlatans that use the paranormal to scam people. They have no problem with those Babylon churches. They don't have any problem with those. Because those don't disrupt the patterns and cycles that worldly people are holding on to. It's those patterns and cycles that lead to addiction to begin with. So, see addiction from the spiritual point of view. Look at the bigger picture. You don't just look at the individual addict. That addict was born as a baby somewhere and that individual grew. What happened on the way that individual turned out like this? And why did the people allow the individual to turn out like that? Now listen, you have reprobates that will self-destruct. And there's nothing others can do about it. That exists. But not everyone that's in a self-destructive mindset is a reprobate. Some people have a self-destructive mindset because they just don't know any better. How do those people that don't know any better end up in that self-destruction? Why is it enabled? Ask that. The moment you begin to ask those questions, a lot of people will want to shut you down or they become enemies of you instantly because they are triggered because they know that somewhere they've contributed to it. But they don't want to face that, and the fact that you're mentioning their responsibility means that you identify them as a culprit in the case. So they turn on you, they put the heat on you, so nobody notices their contribution to the evil. So, keep agreeing with Christ and don't enable the pattern cycles of the world. Be at peace.